Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Atmananda Nubhuyaiva Nyasta Shakyurmaye Nama Hrishikeshaya Mahate Namaste Nantamurtaye Atmanandanubhuyaiva Nasta Shakyurmaye Nama Hrishikeshaya Mahate Namaste Nantamurtaye Atmanandanubhuyaiva Nyasta Shakyurmaye Nama Hrishikeshaya Mahate Namaste Nantamurtaye Atma Ananda of your personal bliss. Anubhutya by perception. Eva certainly. Nyasta given up. Shakti Uramaye the waves of material nature. Nama respectful obeisances. Hrishikeshaya under the supreme controller of the senses. Mahate unto the supreme. Nama respectful obeisances. Te unto you. Ananta unlimited. Murtaye, whose expansions. Translation. Perceiving your personal bliss, you are always transcendental to the waves of material nature. Therefore, my Lord, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. You are the supreme controller of the senses, and your expansions of form are unlimited. You are the greatest, and therefore I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport. This verse analytically differentiates the living entity from the Supreme Lord. The form of the Lord and the form of the conditioned soul are different because the Lord is always blissful, whereas the conditioned soul is always under the threefold miseries of the material world. The Supreme Lord is Satchidananda Vigraha. He derives Ananda, bliss, from his own self. The Lord's body is transcendental, spiritual, but because the conditioned soul has a material body, he has many bodily and mental troubles. The conditioned soul is always perturbed by attachment and detachment, whereas the Supreme Soul is always free from such dualities. The Lord is the supreme master of all the senses, whereas the conditioned soul is controlled by the senses. The Lord is the greatest, whereas the living entity is the smallest. The living entity is conditioned by the waves of material nature, but the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all actions and reactions. The expansions of the Supreme Lord's body are innumerable, Advaitam Achutam Anadim Ananta Rupam. But the conditioned soul is limited to only one form. From history, we learn that a conditioned soul, by mystic power, can sometimes expand into 8 forms, but the Lord's bodily expansions are unlimited. This means that the bodies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead have no beginning and no end, unlike the bodies of the living entities. So Chitraketu Maharaj, he has been very much burdened by his conditioning and his desire to perform his duties as a king. And in so doing, he became so absorbed in these instructions or these performances that he became so absorbed in the material energy that when difficulties arise, you know, in this case means the death of his son, then he was completely overwhelmed. He was lamenting very much. So, but now he's learning about how the differentiation between the soul and the body, and now the soul and the supersoul. That one has to appreciate this difference. Otherwise, if we function in this more, how you say, this material monistic aspect, then we're always going to be distressed, because if we identify with the material nature, we're always going to be disturbed because it is always inferior. It is always temporary. It always creates difficulty. So here then, after the instructions of Narada and Angira Munis, then he's able to see this properly. They perform the funeral rites, and now they're moving on. Now he's getting initiation into transcendental mantras where he can practice then his spiritual life, right? So here they made that whole effort for having this family to carry on the kingdom and everything, you know, their duties. That failed. So now they're all moving on to the next stage of life, right? Because this is the point. The purpose is to go through these stages to be able to engage them in the Lord's service, right? Being engaged in the Lord's service, we get purified. We don't engage them in the Lord's service, we don't get purified. On their own, they're limited. They will end, right? But we see the Lord, his activities, they don't end. His forms, they're unlimited. There's no beginning, no end. Ours has a beginning and end. Ours are limited, his are unlimited. So in this way, with us and the material energy, there's a difference, though we try to claim a non-difference for rasa, relationship. While it's interesting, on the spiritual platform, it's the other way around. Krishna is one, but then he views it as different for relationship. Right? Well, we try to do it the other way around. So actually our relationship is with our body. Right? That's the main thing. When we talk about the material world, we talk about the body. We don't talk about the other aspects, because all the other aspects are connected to us through the body. So Krishna then, in his dealing with the primary and the secondary is to bring out rasa, but it's based on the primary. It's him. He is the primary. While when we try to make ourselves the primary aspect, and then using these secondary aspects to make ourselves happy, not actually being the primary, then we're not happy. And we only deal with others to that point that we get what we're looking for, right? On the material platform, that's how we function. So, but Krishna, it's all about the other person, right? It's about them, and then the relationship that is experienced with them, right? So there's a slight difference here. Actually, it's quite a major difference, but so here is then the Narad Muni and I are bringing this out, that it's the Lord that has to become the central feature. If he's the central feature, then whatever you're doing, it becomes perfect. Right now, he was dealing with his family, with his child, but not connected to Krishna. And it didn't work out nice. He became very miserable. He wanted a son, he got the son, he was even more miserable. So now Narad Muni is teaching him how, if you make Krishna the center, then everything will work very nicely. Right? Everything works perfectly. So now he's making Krishna the center of his life, and we'll see that it works out very well. Doesn't mean that there aren't some reactions here and there, but the point is it works out that he's always Krishna conscious. He becomes perfectly engaged in Krishna's service. So that's the perfectional point that is trying to be obtained. We have to appreciate that it's when we make Krishna part of what we're doing, that's the perfection. It's not that what we're doing, that we make it better and better, and that's the perfection. No, that's natural. You practice something, you do something, you get better at it. You understand the importance at it, you make that endeavor. Right? So that's a side aspect. That's not the main aspect. Right? That's not the main aspect. So what we're trying to bring out then, that from the Bhagavatam here, it's pointing out that whatever you're doing, you make Krishna the center of it. Here he has a dead son, so Krishna then becomes the center of this understanding. It works out perfectly. He'll move on in his ashram. That'll work out. He'll even perform activities as a demon. He's doing the activities of the demon, and he's going back to Godhead. Well, Indra is doing the activities of the devatas, and he's staying here. What's the difference? It's simply Krishna being the center. So that's the point. So what was being pointed out here, it's not about the secondary activity. It's about the connection to Krishna. We tend to overrate the importance of the secondary. It's of course a symptom, but it's not actually the point. It's a symptom of, like just say if you check the rice and it's done, it's a symptom of somebody's ability to cook. Right? But the reason we're cooking is to please Krishna. It's not about the rice. Right? So this is where we have the difficulty, is how to separate the two. Because there is the aspect of the oneness, which is a natural part. Because the living entity, the Lord, his energies, they're all one thing. But there's variety within them. There's visesha, or specialness. So we have to know when the aspect of seeing through the oneness is important, and when the seeing of the specialty or the uniqueness or difference is important. So here is because he's identifying with the body, that's not where the oneness should be. The oneness should be with the Lord. but not in the secondary aspect, in the primary. That our mood to please Him and that reciprocation with Him, that's the primary aspect. That's where the oneness is. How do you do that? How do you express that? That's because there's a secondary. That's the specific form, the specific situation, the specific relationship. Then it all works very nicely. So one has to be able to distinguish these and separate them. Right? Does that make sense? This is then what is here. Then when it's there, then one can very nicely just go ahead in the natural state. So in the spiritual platform, then that natural relationship, natural interaction, then that works out very well. But in the material world, that natural state doesn't work, because here it's not natural. It's not natural for the living entity to have a material body. Excuse me. So the living entity having a material body is not natural. Not having a body is also not natural. Having a spiritual body, that's normal. Remember once one devotee was telling me a long time ago, probably back in the 80s, maybe even 70s, just about their interaction with Prabhupada. And one of the things that struck them was just how normal Prabhupada was. Not normal meaning ordinary, meaning he's normal and we're weird. You know? We're the ones that have the problem. And he's so normal. He's just so naturally fixed and situated in Krishna consciousness, and everything he does just so naturally happens. Right? So that's the position that is being offered here by Narad Muni. The Srimad Bhagavatam is expressing this through different situations. Right? We see the brahmachari life, the marriage, the household life, the renunciation of Kardama Muni. Right? We see the care of the son for the mother, the instructions there of Kapila to his mother. We see the life of, so there's the life of a Brahmin. Then we see Pritumar's, his life as a king. How he deals with things going smoothly. Like with Kardama, everything's going very smoothly. We see with Pritu, then there's difficulties come up, and there's also very nice, smooth things going. So all these different things come up. Chitraketu, it appears to be going nice. They're very enthusiastic. The mode of passion is keeping them going. Then when it doesn't work out, then there's great distress. Right? So all these different aspects, then we learn how, whatever the situation is, it's all about connecting it to Krishna. That's what makes it work nicely. If that's done, then it becomes perfect. And if we don't do that, it's always going to be a problem. Whether it's right now it's happy and the next moment it won't be, or now it's not and next moment it will be. But it'll keep going back and forth. And that when Krishna is the center, then there's the satisfaction. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be changes. We're still within the material energy. So the change here is not satisfying. Right? The changes in the spiritual world, the variety or the transformations there are satisfying because they're always centered about Krishna. So they come up and they adjust about Krishna. Right? So there it works. Here it doesn't. That's the whole point. Is that what we're looking for is real, but it's not here. What we want is not available here. But if we connect it to Krishna, it's available. But it's the connection to Krishna that makes it available, not anything else, not the other aspects. Does that make sense? So this is the whole idea, is you have to be able to tell the difference, and the only reason you have to tell the difference is because we think we're the Lord. So it has to be pointed out, no, God's God, we're not. When we understand that, accept that, and we have appreciation for the Lord, then we can see that closeness and everything. So the position has to be established, then closeness works. Otherwise, if we try to establish closeness without understanding the position, it'll always create trouble. Like that. Is any questions on this? Yes, no. Very good. Yes.
Some practical example for the applying primary and secondary, and basically connecting something to Krishna. Just one activity which you could just connect to Krishna.
Okay, we can try. Means, you know, now while we can still use it, we're using the cooking examples. Give it another 5 years, there's a good chance we won't be able to use it anymore. No one will have heard of it. You know, oh, that's the stuff they do in the restaurant, right? Yeah, that kind of. So, when you're cooking, it means we can look at it from different levels because you're dealing with a formula of primary and secondary. That's the thing about the Vedic formulas of the Vedic ontology, is they always apply. This modern concept where they don't always apply, that's because people are looking at the secondary of the secondary. And so, therefore, it's a detail and it applies in a particular situation. Change the situation, it doesn't apply anymore. So we're conditioned to that, we're used to that. And so most people don't think ontologically, right? But people who are generally have plans and structure things, then they do. So, but they will do according to their experience, which is just within that area that they have. Does that make sense? Yeah. So then what comes up is that the Vedic is not understood, right? Because we generally don't bump into these structures. You know, some different kinds of professionals use structures. And so we hear it from them, but what all they're using is details. They don't actually understand the principle that it's working on. They just observe the material energy, the workings, they see patterns, and therefore they create an ontology there. You know, they create a structure to it. And so then, the Vedic, though, it always applies because the ontology is simply explaining Krishna, and Krishna being everything means they always apply. Right? Now, the detail in which they apply it may change, but the principle of the formula will always remain. Does that make sense? So we'll show how we can switch the positions and the formula still works. And does that make sense? Okay. So let us take, we want to cook for Krishna. Okay? So now, in cooking for Krishna, what's actually the important point? The cooking or Krishna? You understand? It's Krishna. Because if we just cook and don't think of Krishna or see it in connection with Krishna, we've missed the point. The materialist also cooks. So it's because it's about Krishna. Therefore, the cooking has a value. So Krishna is the primary, the cooking is the secondary. Okay? That's clear, right? Let's shift it now over to the cooking. Okay? Now we want to be successful. Because we want to cook nicely for Krishna, there's some skill required. Right? So, but the formula still applies. What's the primary aspect of the cooking and what's the secondary? Right? The primary will be the techniques of cooking, what makes cooking. How to fry something, how to steam, boil, how to make those different elements. Those are the universal. You know those, you can cook any cuisine, any recipe. That's the cooking. The secondary then will be what you're cooking. The particular vegetable or grain or milk product or whatever. Does that make sense? Right? So we have to, so therefore, according to Krishna, we cook. According to the principles of cooking, we apply it to the various ingredients. Okay? Now let us shift it again over to the ingredients and all that. So, and that aspect of the cooking. So then we're going to see we have the various ingredients that are being applied to the different techniques, but now that uses various utensils. Yeah, so what's important, the utensil or what it is we're cooking? How do I choose? Yes, what we're going to cook. So like that, I have 5 kilos of potatoes, so do I have to get a pot that's that big, or the technique I want to use on the potatoes, the pot has to reflect that. I'm going to fry them, that's that kind of thing. I want to deep fry them, a different pot. I want to steam or boil them, a different pot. Right? I want to cut them, I use a knife. I want to grate them, I use a grater. Right? I want to flatten them. I get out a, one of those 2.5 kilo hammers. Whatever it is, the technique I want to use. Right? Does that make sense? Now let's say I want to cook, but now can I just walk into the kitchen and magically it happens? No, I have to plan. So therefore, then the secondary, I have to have all the arrangements. I have to have the kitchen. I have to have all the different utensils there. As a principle, I have to go to the market. Right? And now to go to the market, then there must be the planning. You understand? So why plan? Because you're going to go to the market. I don't just plan and not go to the market. I don't go to the market without planning. You understand? You go to the market and if someone says, okay, so what are we buying? Well, I don't know. Well, what are you cooking? I don't know. What do you want to cook? I have no idea. So you understand? So the secondary is what manifests the primary. The primary is independent, but if you want to see it, you need the secondary. It's like Krishna is independent, but it's through his internal potency, which is the secondary, that you see his form. Otherwise, he's unlimited. How do you see unlimited? So through the internal potency, we're able to see him. Right? We use our own body to see, our own senses. Right? So the point is that the secondary manifests the primary, but the primary is independent. The secondary doesn't make the primary. That's the difficulty we have, because we take ourselves as the primary because I did it, that's why it happened. No, it's because the secondary aspects happen, that's why it happened. Right? They manifest. But the secondary has no meaning without the primary. If I have a kitchen and don't cook, or I have ingredients and don't cook, what's the meaning? Right? Does that make sense? That's why the Shastras say, you have money but don't use it, then what's the difference between the miser and a poor man? They both have nothing. Right? One in potential does, but since he doesn't use it, he's as good as the poor man. Does that make sense? Yeah. So does that work? So that's the whole thing, is that it always adjusts. That's why it's more difficult to understand. We're used to one formula, one situation. If you change the situation, it's a new formula. That's why you have so many books explaining the exact same thing, because they don't know the formula. So because of that, then they have to give different structures. You know what I'm saying? But we're talking about the same subject matter. I'm not talking about a different subject matter. I'm not talking about Krishna and astronomy and then Krishna and Ayurveda. They'll use different language, different structure, but it's discussing the same thing. But because it's specific to that topic, it has its own language and everything. I'm talking about within the same thing that there's different, because they don't see the primary. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like that. Is that okay? Yes. Okay. Something else? Yes.
I'm just a little confused by a phrase Prabhupada used in the purport. He says the conditioned soul is always perturbed by detachment and attachment.
Yes.
So I was just thinking, I don't know what it means to be perturbed by detachment. I thought we were to strive for detachment, and it's a good thing. So how is it that the conditioned soul is perturbed by detachment? Because it seems like if you're detached, you won't be perturbed. So I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
But here is then the key is that they're detached, but being energy, they have to be attached to something. So if you're detached and not attached to Krishna, you'll be perturbed. Right? Yeah. So just like if you are attached, but that attachment is engaged in Krishna's service, it doesn't disturb you. You know, like the Pandavas. They have a kingdom, they have family life, they have the whole thing. But their Yudhishthira, you see, is undisturbed because it's connected to Krishna. Same way as their detachment, then when they're in the forest, then it doesn't bother them. Because otherwise, then what you get is what's indicating here is karma and jnana. So the living entity will be disturbed by fruitive endeavor and desire for liberation. And both won't satisfy. So as soon as you add Krishna, then both become viable mediums. Right? So you're trying to become detached from the material energy only because it's useful in attachment to Krishna. Is that okay? Okay. Something else? Yes. I think there's a...
You mentioned about that there's proper times to apply the principle of oneness and that we should see things in that way, and that there are other times to see the differences and that the king was seeing it in the wrong way. So in which time should we apply which thing?
See, you have what's the commonality, what's the difference. So commonality is your basis on why you would act. And your difference is how you can act, right? Means if you're the same, how do you act? You know what I'm saying? But because there's a difference, that's how you can act, right? Does that make sense? You can cook because there's a difference between you and the cooking items. There's a oneness because the principle of cooking, you understand, and that it matches the nature of what you're cooking. Right? Because if you try to cook something that doesn't have the nature of what you're trying to do, there's a problem. Just to give a simple example like that you may be familiar with. Deep frying ice cream. Right? The two don't go together very well. There is some, how you say, a restaurant in Jaipur who does do it. But what they do is they really freeze the ice cream, cut it into the little blocks, freeze it again, and then take that, put it on their spoon, drop it into the, the hot whatever they cook it in, and we probably don't want to know. And then as soon as it's just in there, you immediately take it out so the outside would have melted, and then immediately put it back in a very cold refrigerator. So it freezes the outside again, but it's a different consistency than the rest of it. So somehow or another that difference in the sensation is supposed to be something that you're willing to pay money for. Okay? Does that make sense? But hearing about that process, now if you take some ice cream, go into your mom's kitchen, get out the ghee, heat it up, throw in the ice cream and start cooking like you would cook some potatoes, and then waiting for it to cook, and it just keeps melting and getting mushier and messier and that, and then your mom walks in, it's not good. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing, is that the commonality must mean your understanding of it and its nature has to be the same. And then your ability and your nature to deal with that as a separate, having that common, but that difference that you are you and the potato is the potato, right? And not so much that we're, and I guess you could say in the technique then we're all together, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Something else? No? Yes.
A lot of conflicts seem to be because of putting too much emphasis on the secondary. So if one has let's say a devotee has an authority and a relationship with that superior, and that devotee who's the superior has a problem with another superior devotee based on some secondary thing, which they're blowing out of proportion. So now the junior devotee, how can he avoid getting influenced in a dangerous way by that disagreement between two senior Vaishnavas?
According to Niti Shastra, you just stay out of the way. You don't get involved. That's the rule. When two kings have a disagreement, you suddenly have to go to the bathroom. Like that. There's something else you just have to tend to. Kids got to go to the dentist, you know, just something. You just got to go do that. You don't get involved because each one will expect you to take their side. It will not work out good. Right? So you just don't get involved. See, it's not even here, it's not even that you have to take the secondary out of proportion. If the secondary doesn't have Krishna involved, it's already out of proportion. Even if it's in the right proportion mechanically to work, if you don't see Krishna involved, the view will be wrong, because then that's where difference comes up, because you can't see where the connection is. You understand? So the general cooperation, just like the residents of Vrindavan, they all work together, they can all cooperate together, but they don't all have the same perspective on what's the best way to please Krishna. You understand? Mother Jashoda thinks it's, you know, you cook a nice meal, you sit down, you sit there and serve it nicely and eat in a cultured way. The cowherd boys think you steal the lunches and toss them around to each other and then watch as the person tries to grab it. You know? You understand? So, but the point is the center is Krishna. So it works, but you have to know where to apply it. So if the cowherd boys do that in Mother Jashoda's house, big problem. Mother Jashoda comes out to the cowherd field, tries to set up a nice picnic, serve all the lunch, tell all the boys to gather around, problem. Do you understand? So that's why then the Shastra then defines what you do where. It doesn't necessarily make sense to us because we only know secondary, we don't know primary. And because we only know secondary, that means we only know our own secondary. So we would do it in that particular way, but there's a bigger picture. Right? Does that make sense? So let's say like that. You have cultured boys, they can play out in the field, but they can also function inside a house. So those ones who can only play in the field and only play in the house, that's a problem. So that means they're not well developed. Now they may look at it, but playing's good. You know, we're kids. Why don't we play? Why do these adults, you know, limit our playing? You know, you could come up with all kinds of things like this. You know, our rights as children, children's rights to play. You know, I mean, you can do this kind of thing, but it's a matter of you don't know what the bigger picture is. So that's why then the Shastras define the bigger picture, define the secondary aspects and what they are, how they relate to each other, and what situations they're to be used in. So now you take all that, then it works very nicely. You don't take all that, it will never make sense. It doesn't matter, you know, who you are or who you think you are. It won't work. Like that. So that's why the Vedas say what they say. It's because it will work if you use it. This idea is, oh, it's archaic, it gets old. That's only, the modern thing gets old because it's only specific for the specific detail. And the detail's always changing. You know, what was happening in the 60s is not happening now. Or what was happening in the 80s, you know, it just keeps changing. But the principle of what's there is still going on. People want to be happy. You know, people want to have relationships. People want to be secure. Those things are all going on. So if you approach those principles through the appropriate detail, it will work. It doesn't matter because time is eternal. We have to understand. We're taking it that time is limited. No, we're limited. Time's not. You know, we take it that, you know, now modern man has come up with all kinds of new things. But if you check in history, most of these things that we're doing with now were already there before. Right? But it's just, you know, it's been forgotten for a while. You know what I'm saying? You burn enough people at the stake, people tend to either are dead and therefore it's lost, or tend to not talk about it and it gets lost. Right? And so it's been, you know, a few hundred years, no one's got burnt at the stake. Now people can talk about it. You know what I'm saying? So people are secure. So you can be scientific and you're not going to end up in some strange situation you don't want. Is that
yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Last? No. Okay, so end here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande.